to our Basecamp session. This is our second webinar as part of our 4-part series that we're doing. So we're really excited today to talk about the topic of how to deliver effective feedback. Now, I'm sure we have all at some point received feedback from others, so we'll all be familiar with the concept. And for a lot of you who are managers, you've also probably had to provide feedback. And that can be a little bit of a challenging conversation, especially if it's feedback to do maybe with a blind spot area, like we like to refer to here at Red Wolf Group, or if it's constructive feedback. So today, we really just want to focus on a scenario that we've put together and see how we can link that with PI, and definitely trying to see how you can incorporate PI whenever you do have to provide feedback to your staff members. So we'll kick off. So just to start with, in terms of whenever you are delivering feedback, and I'm sure everyone's got their own process of preparing and getting ready to have that conversation, but a tip that we like to always give our clients is to first have a look at a person's PI profile. So we'll always reference a person's PI and making sure that you go back and have a look at it. So it's definitely not something that you only want to read once when a person completes their behavioural assessment, but something that you constantly look at. I always find that whenever I look at a person's PI and I have a certain question in mind, there's like a new revelation that comes out of their PI profile, especially when you're specifically looking for something. Now, to do with feedback, what we would recommend whenever you're looking at someone's PI is to identify what their highest driver is. Now, in order to find out a person's highest driver, you want to look at the midpoint, which is normally indicated by the black line. For example, here in our image, we've got the A, B, C, D dots. So that's like our indicator of the midpoint. And you want to see which factor is furthest to the right of the midpoint. And that will be the person's highest drive. And so that highest drive will be a great predictor of their needs. So for example, let's just say we have someone who has a high dominance drive, that's their highest factor. They will need control over their own activities. They will want to make sure that they're impactful with what they do in their role, and that success in terms of achieving their goals and targets will be really important to them. They're going to pride themselves around this highest drive. That's something that they'll probably be a little bit more sensitive around if you have to provide feedback to do with that driver. Now, if you look at their PI and you identify that, okay, their highest driver is actually what I'm going to be talking to them about, it's just really good to know that they may be sensitive around a few things to do with that driver. So for example, again, when we're looking at that dominance drive, they may be a bit more sensitive if you tell them that they haven't achieved a certain goal, or maybe they've lost slightly control of a project. So really making sure that whenever you're providing that feedback, have a quick look at their PI, identify their highest driver, and see whether that links to the feedback you're going to provide. Now, there definitely might be situations when their highest driver doesn't match the feedback that you're going to give, and that's totally fine. It's just a really useful tip in terms of just incorporating their profile and seeing how you can link it when giving that feedback. Now, all of you hopefully from training or at some point in time have had access to our 4 factors cheat sheet. And I'm not sure if any of you have it handy close by just to reference. We thought it'd be really good to reference it during the webinar today, but we will be popping in the chat as well a link of the 4 factors cheat sheet, so feel free to just use that link to open it up. And today we just want you all to refer back to this as we're talking through the scenario. So we're about to play a video that will give us our example of how someone can give effective feedback. Have a look at the 4 factors cheat sheet and see. We're going to be talking about a specific person. Her name's Ashley. See if you can identify whether she sits on the high side or the low side for each of the 4 factors. So remembering that that dominance drive is that drive to exert influence over people and events. So they're going to be more independent, or they're going to be more collaborative. When we're talking about that extroversion drive, do they really want to have that social interaction and build rapport with people? Or they're a little bit more analytical and want those opportunities to reflect on their decisions? When we're talking about that patience drive, are they more steady and stable and wanting that continuous repetitive workflow, or do they love variety and want to be working in that fast-paced environment? And finally, looking at that formality drive. Do they need rules and structure in order to complete their work, or are they happy with a bit more flexibility and having that freedom from structure? So hopefully everyone's had a chance to click on the link or to grab that, their 4 factors cheat sheet. So we'll just go into the video now, which hopefully everyone will be able to see and hear.
This is Ashley. Ashley is one of the team's most productive team members. She gets things done quickly and with minimal supervision. Michelle is Ashley's manager. Michelle values Ashley's contribution due to her high attention to detail, proactivity, and drive to get things done quickly and correctly. However, Ashley can get frustrated with others when they don't work as fast as she does or when they make mistakes. She's known as a perfectionist and she's all about the detail. Ashley at times can grow impatient and confront other team members about how things should be done. She constantly chases her colleagues on their work and wants others to match her pace. Michelle has observed that Ashley is often expressing her frustration with others when they don't work as fast as her or when they're making mistakes. Michelle feels it's important to give Ashley some feedback about how she's impacting others, but she's not sure how to go about it. In a recent team meeting, Ashley was becoming more vocal and confronting other members of the team, saying, "Well, why didn't you reply straight away? That's what I would have done." Michelle quickly said to Ashley, "Let's talk about this after the meeting." Michelle knows she's got to give Ashley some feedback, but she doesn't know how to go about it. How should Michelle go about providing effective feedback in her next meeting with Ashley?
Perfect. So there we've sort of got that scenario where Ashley is being a little bit more impatient with her team members, obviously has that drive to get things done quickly and is really proactive herself. And it's sort of caused a few issues with some of her members, and Michelle, her manager, has identified it. Now, we might throw some questions out to the group, and I know Shannon's really excited to get some talking happening.
Yes. So now that you've actually watched that video, if you were Ashley's manager, how do you think you'd go about delivering some of that feedback? And I'm hoping I'm going to get some volunteers here who will speak. Otherwise, I might have to do a random selection of whose name I feel like picking out because I don't know most of you. But if you're comfortable sharing, please speak up.
Hey, would you have a high dominance, Ashley?
Would she have a high A?
Yep.
Why would you think that?
Just very dominant in the way she speaks, the way she presents, and very low patience, I think.
Very low patience.
Low patience, yeah.
Absolutely. She's very impatient. That was the first thing that I picked up on. So how would you actually go about giving her, preparing for that conversation prior to actually having it?
Okay.
Anyone sort of been in the situation where they've had to give some feedback before?
Possibly. We'll have to be straight to the point, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. No wishy-washy or fluff.
No wishy-washy or fluff. Anyone else? What would you... Oh, Osama.
Yeah, you really want to acknowledge her work before you start off. And then you should have the details that what you want to cover with in the discussion.
Yes.
Otherwise, it could end up very aggressively.
Yeah. You really want to prepare really well. And there's so many different models out there around what you can do to prepare yourself to actually give some effective feedback. But yes, you do want to make sure that you keep it very factual. So you're really making sure you're walking into that conversation having very calm emotion, that you're just talking the facts. You're not talking about, necessarily the behaviours that were called out. It's just very much around the facts of what happened and how it might be perceived. Lachlan, I was going to call you out because I don't know, for some reason, maybe it's because you're on video. I shouldn't pick on you, should I? Because you turned your video on.
Note for next time.
Have you had to provide much feedback in the past?
No, fairly new. So looking after franchisees now, providing feedback, about their stores and their teams and stores' performance.
Yeah.
So fairly new for myself, but similar to what was said before, like one particular franchisee, we're going through some feedback about her store tomorrow, and similar type to Ashley, I think, is but very direct, to the point, very factual. Like, I've got to be really factual with her. So just making sure that I've got that prepared in advance.
Yes.
And a clear agenda that, I perhaps send in advance, or I have sent in advance, so that gives her time to prepare as well.
Yeah, exactly. So knowing the audience of who you're actually delivering the feedback to is really important. So some of the models that are out there, the most common one that's used is the SBI model. So that's around making sure that you're following S, which is situation, B, the behaviour, and I, the actual impact that it had to both the situation and to other people. So that's a nice, easy model to follow when you are delivering that feedback. And again, keeping it really factual so you're not instigating any unnecessary conflict. Thank you, Sarah. Situation. SBI. Okay, so we know that we're going to prepare really well going into the conversation. We're going to have a look at potentially who this person is. And this really leads us quite nicely, actually, into let's have a look at what Ashley's profile is like, because the better you can prepare and predict how that feedback might actually land with the person, the more receptive that individual is going to be. And there's a concept around giving feedback. Do you push or pull? And we're really sort of hoping people ask for feedback on a regular basis, because then you're helping develop them by a pull when they're asking for feedback versus pushing the feedback on them. Now, we're actually in a situation where we have to push the feedback on, but let's see how we can best prepare, dig into Ashley's profile so that we can, make sure that the message will land as effectively as possible. So, Alexia, let's learn a little bit more about what Ashley's like.
Was there any guesses maybe quickly for anyone wanting to put in the chat, maybe a reference profile that they thought Ashley might be? Eamon, I know you referenced that she might have a high A and a low C, so a high dominance drive, low patience drive. But if anyone had any thoughts, feel free to quickly pop them in the chat in terms of what reference profile Ashley might be. Yep, Harvey, you've put Ventura. Kat, you've put Maverick. They're both really good guesses because, yes, a Ventura will have a high A drive, and so will a Maverick, and they'll both actually have a low patience drive as well. So pretty close, but Ashley is actually an altruist. So really common altruist profiles. Sort of to your point, Lachlan, you might have some altruists in customer service. We find that they're really good customer service people, or in sales roles where they've got to have that people relations. So she's actually an altruist. But if you look specifically, Harvey, you've put in here that you're an altruist, but you might be a little bit different to Ashley, because what we want to look at is that, yes, we've definitely got the reference profile, but we really want to focus in on the pattern. That's also really important. So if anyone typically knows what an altruist profile looks like, they normally actually have a lower dominance drive. So they normally actually feed into the collaborative side. But in this situation, Ashley actually has a slightly moderate amount of that independence drive. And that's probably what's making her a bit more direct when she's talking with people, and what's making her not so afraid to voice her opinions and to sort of tell people how she feels. She's also got that higher extroversion drive. So again, she's going to go up to people and probably talk to them face to face. She won't necessarily rely on email. if she's in that environment where she actually can see the person, she'll probably go up and speak with them and have a little bit that direct conversation. Now, a lot of you, especially with Adventure and Maverick, you all mentioned that, yes, this person has to have a low patience drive. And you can see that Ashley's patience drive is all the way on the very low side and almost feeds into the extremely low. So statistically, when we look at a person's pattern, normally people, about 73%, I think it is, sit in the moderate amount. So either moderately high or moderately low. The further out we go, so with Ashley's patience drive being in that very low, she sits in about that 12% of the population. And that extremely low is even less, about 3% or so. So she's going to really want to work at a fast pace, which is probably why she's getting impatient with people when they're not matching her speed. She wants to work quickly. She wants to get things done, but still to that high accuracy. So she's got that higher D formality drive. So she'll make sure that things are done correctly. And that's why I was mentioned in the video that she's a perfectionist. We do tend to find that people with that high formality drive really want to make sure that they're getting the job done right and giving that really high quality work. So very interesting profile here. Can anyone tell me or want to take a guess at what Ashley's widest factor combination is? So starting to look at how two factors relate with each other. Does anyone want to take a stab and pop in to the chat? And Dolly, yeah, I just saw your question here. So will high formality mean that feedback needs to be on point, not subjective? Correct. High formality people do tend to look at facts and data that is important to them. So it will definitely have to be quite factual, like what we were mentioning before. So yeah, not fluffy or general, really to the point, be really direct, and they'll probably be able to take that on board as well, being that they have that slightly higher A dominance drive. You will have the opportunity to have that a bit more direct conversation. So yes, we've got over here D over C, careful with rules. Yep, a few people have put D over C. That's great. That's Ashley's widest factor combination. Now, why I'm asking about factor combinations is because, yes, the 4 factors themselves, it's really important to know where they sit. But where we can dig a little bit deeper is actually looking at those factor combinations. So what we know with D over C, that careful with rules, is they're actually going to be quite rigid when it comes to deadlines. So deadlines are really important to Ashley. She's going to be very punctual and she's going to make sure that she stays on top of her deadlines. If anything, she'll probably get her work done early. So if she has team members who maybe get their work done just before the deadline, that might cause some issues from her, might cause her to get a little bit more impatient. And that's what we can see from this scenario. So we can sort of identify that looking at that factor combination, that those deadlines and that structure is super, super important to her. And if others aren't meeting it, she's starting to voice her concerns around that. Is there any other factor combination that stands out to anybody? So another wide factor combination that might be impacting how she works. Fred, yep, B over C, that's another really wide factor combination. Yep, very big. So B over C, does anyone know? Oh, there we go. Someone's just pointed in. Thanks, Chatika. B over C, so quick to connect. Yes. So that does technically mean that she should be able to build rapport with others, be able to have conversations and sort of strengthen those people-related skills. But in this situation, though, it's slightly not so much working or backfiring a little bit, because even though she might be quick to connect, she's voicing her opinions in a way that maybe others won't be reciprocating as well to her. So even though she's got that connection piece, so she feels comfortable to go up and to talk to people, and maybe she thinks what she's saying isn't quite wrong, it's slightly backfiring. So a little bit of feedback or context around that factor combination could be really useful. And finally, I also just want to point out the A over C factor combination, which is proactive versus that C of A, which is responsive. So she's got that proactive drive to her. It's across the midpoint. Like we mentioned in the video, she's really going to want to get things done quickly, make sure that her work's on time and that everything's done correctly. Now, does anyone here, out of curiosity, have any altruists in their team who can just remember off the top of their head if they have any altruists in their team? No? Okay. Harvey, I think you had mentioned that you were an altruist. If you don't mind me picking on you a little bit, I'm just going to ask you, does your A factor sit on the low side or on the high side?
I'm more into the left side. So I'm more collaborative.
You're more collaborative. Yep, perfect. And Marika as well, where does your A factor sit, on the collaborative side or on the independent side? Just out of curiosity.
What I can see is more on the left side, collaborative side.
Yep, perfect. So I just wanted to note that typically altruists, their A factor will sit on the collaborative side. So that's why it's really important to look at a person's profile, because in Ashley's case, you might know that she's an altruist and you might know that altruists are typically quite collaborative, they're team players. And that normally means that they actually stray away from conflict slightly. If you're a little bit more collaborative, you really care about your team's opinions and about people's opinions. So you probably won't be as vocal to go up and actually express your thoughts or criticisms. But because Ashley's got that slightly higher A factor and it sits on the independent side, it's actually changing her behaviours. So she's not acting specifically like what you might call a typical altruist. She's got the confidence to actually go up and speak with people. So it's really important to note that, yes, an altruist is what we like to refer to, or as a reference profile, it's like the suburb that you live in. So everyone who's an altruist, they may live in the same suburb, but it's really important that we look specifically at their pattern, because their pattern is going to be like their address. That's going to be where do they specifically live in that suburb. So now moving on and having a little bit of a look at that 4 factors cheat sheet, if you've got it out and available to you, which driver, out of the 4 factors, which driver is triggering Ashley's behaviour the most, do we think? And a bit of a hint here, you can look at the behaviours listed on the cheat sheet. So we're trying to identify which out of the 4 factors is triggering this behaviour. Perfect, we've got some people putting it in the C. Yes, that's right, everyone. Yeah, that C drive, that patience drive is definitely triggering their behaviour. So when we look at the needs and the behaviours, but specifically the needs there to do with the patience drive, we can see that it's got they're very impatient, restless, abrupt, can be rapid, and that's what's coming up in this scenario. We've got this situation where Ashley's getting a little bit restless with her team. She wants the work that they're meant to be submitting or doing together to be done quicker, and she's getting impatient with them and she's voicing that. So whenever you're looking at a profile and you're thinking, how am I going to remember their needs and their behaviours? Have a look at your 4-factor cheat sheet. This is where you'll get a lot of your answers from, and that little bit extra on top of actually using the PI system. So really good that everyone was able to identify that was her C, her patience drive. So how would we sort of go about, now that we know that her driver is that C drive, it's triggering her behaviours, how can we sort of go about starting to deliver feedback around this factor? And I'll just sort of put it out if anyone wants to put any ideas on the chat. I know that we had some people who mentioned before that it has to be very objective and we're talking about the facts. But now that we know that we're looking at Ashley's patience drive, and it's actually her most extreme drive when we look at her profile, it's the factor that sits out the widest. Is there any other approach that you might take when you're speaking with her? Any ideas? So if we're talking about a person's patience drive and we're trying to give them some feedback around that, any thoughts on how maybe you might manage that situation?
Would you be more formal? Would you play on her D and, like everyone was saying, agenda, structure, and just have that formality in place and use that to counter the C? Would that Would that be correct, or am I off the track?
No, definitely, Eamon. I think that would work for sure. Is playing on that formality factor. So definitely making sure that you've got all the facts there. So you might be saying to do and linking that with the patient's drive, maybe asking questions around when does she expect her team members to have work done? So maybe for her, the idea of a deadline or when things need to be ready is actually earlier than what other people expect. So maybe it's asking those type of probing questions on when does she want others to have work done for her, how, far in advance, and looking at her pace. So how quickly is she getting work done, or how quickly does she like to work compared to her team members, and giving her a little bit of that insight.
It will be tricky as well because of, sorry to jump in.
That's all right.
I imagine because she is slightly independent, so the collaboration factor is not as present. But I'm just thinking as well, though, to your point that, she was getting a bit annoyed where people may have been cutting it too fine, or other things like that. I mean, in that regard, it's, I'm thinking to myself, maybe there's actually, as a group, we need to work on our working agreements and our social contract about, this is actually dealing with something like this where it's affecting her to the point where she's bringing it up in a team meeting and really maybe getting up in someone's grill.
Yep.
Maybe we have a group cultural aspect that we need to address to try and create understanding. So there's probably going to be not just feedback for Ashley, but subsequently the others in the team as well who have been perhaps the recipients of Ashley's advice.
Yeah, I think you've brought up a really, really good point there, Dolly, is, looking at, in general, what's talking as a group, what are the agreements that you have set within the group, and making sure that everyone's clear on that. Maybe there's a little bit, a few areas there that Ashley isn't quite as clear on, or she doesn't have that clarity. And again, that links up with her formality drive. She needs that clarity to understand her role fully. So maybe, yes, there will be some feedback needing that you need to give to Ashley and sort of ask those questions, but then take it back to the broader group and see if you can put and set some agreements down to sort of combat her getting vocal and speaking up.
Because the B over C also means, is that quick to connect?
Yep, that's correct. Yep, B over C. Yes, so that's quick to connect.
It doesn't indicate. It suggests maybe that she's not necessarily socially inept or whatever the right word is. She's capable to cut it socially, but that extreme C, or pushing the extremes, will just she just can't help it. It's overriding perhaps. I'm just guessing.
Correct. Yes, it's definitely overriding that B over C factor combination right now, and especially because when we look at that patient's drive, it's further out wide in comparison to her B, her extroversion. So it is overruling that quick to connect factor combination. But it definitely means that, yes, she's got that ability to connect and talk with others. And I think where I can link it is actually to what you've said in the chat, Kat, is maybe there's something that's stressing her out, right? Maybe there's something going on that's triggering this behavior and that's making her be a bit more vocal with her teammates, even though she might have a good connection with them normally. So I think that's another really important thing to mention and to think about when giving this type of feedback is, yes, is she stressed out? Is something going on where she's got a lot of pressure at work and it's really triggering that behavior to come forward? Yes, and Noel, you've also put in the chat revisiting timelines as a group, so linking up with what Dolly said and checking where everyone is at and making sure that everyone's up to date and correct on when progress needs to happen and when things are due. Most definitely. Dolly, you put in here her boss forgot to do her read back.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And Noel, you've kind of pointed it out. It's likely when you start to dig into what's stressing her out that you'd find out because of that D2C, she's very she likes the structure, she likes to be on time, she likes to meet the deadlines, right? So what might be stressing her out is the fact that someone else is taking a bit longer, and that might push out the deadlines, and then she won't be able to meet the deadlines, and that's causing her to stress a bit because now that's triggering her point of where she starts to have that escalation of stress because she wants to deliver on time. So it's all worth that conversation, but so Kat, rightly so, always seek to understand the circumstance first, because maybe it's something else that's stressing her out that's completely irrelevant, but in this circumstance, we'll probably pull on the fact that she's so determined to meet deadlines and she's relying on a team to help her get there, and some of them are working not at the pace that she's expecting, and that's therefore causing her stress.
Yep.
Follow-up question there, Shannon. So if that is the case, like it's her teammates that's stressing her out. So, and these are the things that we cannot control because maybe it's the other person's behavior. So how do we deal with that? How do we give feedback to her? Do we tell her, let it go? Or do we tell her, okay, then we need to make some adjustments? Now, I'm just curious because it's a team dynamics.
It is. And there's so many different ways that you can approach it. So it's a really good question. Maybe it is a good idea. You'd suggest to her that this is the situation that's occurred. This is the behaviour that you're demonstrating. The team is, are not receiving your directness very effectively. How do you think we might be able to work this out? See if they have some suggestion, because obviously, naturally, by default, the best situation is to work better as a team, pull together. Let's look at the social constructs and figure out, rewrite those rules that we've agreed to. For sure, that's a great solution. But maybe she's got another idea. Maybe she's thinking, I never knew that that's how my behavior came across. Thank you for letting me know, and now I'll change the way I speak. So I always prefer to go in with asking them what they think is a good way to resolve the circumstance and see what they would suggest first, because you'll have lots of ideas as well, because that's within their control, right?
Yeah.
The decision as to whether or not they want to change their behaviour, that's great. The best way to get them to do that is if they come up with that and you're not telling them to do that.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
And Kat, your question sort of links into what I've got next in terms of leveraging some of the PI tools that are available to you. So everyone that has access to the Inspire module, for every person, there are a couple tools that you can reference, and they're always on the left-hand side. Whenever you click on their name and you go into their person page, you'll see these tools under coaching and development and a bit under the about section. And specifically, I want to have a look at the personal development chart. So I'm sure a few of you have looked at this before, but the reason why I love the personal development chart is that it talks to a person's strengths to do with each of their factors, but then it also talks to the caution areas that can arise from those strengths, especially if someone's stressed or maybe they feel very under pressure or they don't have total understanding. This is a really great tool that you can leverage as a manager. So for example here, I've pulled just like how Ashley is. She's on the very low side for her patience drive. And we can see that her strengths are she's proactive, very results orientated, able to deal with time pressure, able to deal with variety and change, and is a good multitasker. So all these great strengths that she brings to the role. Now, some cautions that might come up is that she may appear to be a bit terse, a bit, cut to the chase type of thing. She may tend to be intolerant of delays, especially when it's impacting results. And she may become a bit frustrated in stagnant environments. So if you ever have a situation and maybe you've got an inkling that something's going on or like this, with Michelle, Ashley's manager, she can sort of see that Ashley's being vocal. You can go into the personal development chart and see any of these caution areas coming out of a person's strength. PI sort of gives you a few of the answers. So, they may or may not relate, but in this situation, after watching the video, really all three of these caution areas are coming out from Ashley to do with her strengths, with her patience drive. I also really like this tool because it can help de-emotionalize the conversation when you're having that feedback session with the person. So you could actually bring up this chart. You could talk it through with your team members. So you could definitely look at the strengths, and you can ask questions around, do any of these caution areas resonate with you? And see if they think of a situation when it has happened maybe in the last couple of weeks or the last few months. So really having that open conversation, also allowing for them to give their feedback and opinions. And then from there, if they do identify or you identify together some caution areas that are popping up, you can then take a look at some of the self-coaching tips. So the tool also has self-coaching tips for each of the 4 factors. So from here, we could get Ashley to really reflect on that urgency. Does everything need to be done right now? Is she wanting things a week, 2 weeks in advance? Is that really what needs to be happening? And also coaching around that, recognizing that people have different paces and manage expectations differently. And again, maybe taking that back to the wider team. And I know Fred had put in the chat, looking at that team dynamics. So what's the paces in the group? Maybe we need to show each other our PI profiles. Maybe Ashley needs to see who else is in the team. Maybe someone has a higher C drive than her, really giving that awareness and making sure that we're helping get everyone on the same page so Ashley doesn't feel as stressed or as vocal to express her opinions. Has anyone by any chance used this tool before, or is it something that's a little bit new or a bit of a refresher for some of you? I'd be really curious to hear if anyone's used it and it's been able to help them in a certain situation. Oh, sorry.
Looks like, or it sounds like all of you are going to jump on that tool and start using the little secret tips there for future conversations. They really are super helpful, being able to put yourself. This is a really easy way to put yourself in another person's shoes, right? To really resonate and understand where this person is coming from, because it's not often that they're coming from a bad place, right? Generally, the behaviours that come out that require some feedback, they're not coming from an intentions or a malicious intent. It's just that there's some other circumstance or dynamic that's occurring. So if you can put yourself into that person's shoes, then the more effective the feedback conversation is going to be. Awesome.
For sure. Yes. So really sort of just to end off for the final couple minutes that we have left, obviously feedback, having those courageous conversations, they form part of your role as a manager, and they might happen in different situations with different people. So we just wanted to quickly touch on a few of these skills and the importance of these skills to do with our management program. And I'm just going to bring in Sarah, who's our head trainer here at Red Wolf Group, just to sort of quickly talk through our management programs and how you can leverage these skills.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Alexia. Yes, well, it's been a great session today. And I guess if you enjoy exploring these topics or you want to build that competency as a really strong manager and a strong leader, we've taken the guesswork out of it for you. So we've got 2 programs that we run that is specifically targeted at those essential skills. And I don't like to call them soft skills. You probably hear a lot of people refer to them as, I think they're essential skills, and they're essential because when we get them right and we're confident in using them, it actually completely changes the way that we manage people, lead, manage ourselves, work within teams. And so these 2 programs are built around 6 core competencies. In our first program, we have our Manage with Confidence that looks at our capability, our credibility, and our competency. And really what we're talking about here is is how do we refine those essential skills to have better conversations, to give better quality feedback, to really engage in development and performance, and understanding those business acumen spaces. So how does my role or the role of my team members or the role of my peers impact the business? And as a manager or a team leader, how can I foster and grow that space within myself and within others as well? And then in the leadership section, we have empathy, engagement, and empowering. And this is really about that inspiration and that motivation. So we're taking a step to the right here, and we're looking at, okay, well, how do I bring out the best in others? How do I bring out the best in myself? And what tools can I do to do that? And how can I educate myself and educate those around me to lead with empathy, to engage others to achieve their goals, and to hold space for others to feel empowered to make those choices as well. So some really great insights. These programs are designed and delivered in-house by Red Wolf Group, fully integrated with PI as well. So don't worry, we're not teaching you anything that you haven't already been exposed to. What we're doing is diving deeper. So we're going deep and we're going wide at the same time. So we're just expanding that toolbox and that toolkit that you have in order for you to achieve your personal goals in your career, but then to help others that you might mentor or guide or manage or lead in your role to achieve their goals as well. So yeah, if you're interested, I think we've got Eamon on the call here, and we've got Alexia. We're more than happy to chat, but it's really a program that's integrated in evidence-based learning approaches. Everything that we do is applied learning. So we're not going to talk at you. We're going to engage with you, and we're going to get your worldview and your context. And so everything that we teach you, you'll be immediately able to go and apply in your job. Literally, as soon as you jump off the program or the course or the call or the face-to-face session, whichever one you might be on, you will actually be able to take that content and apply it straight away. And then you also get private coaching throughout. So if you have any roadblocks, or if you have anything that you want to unpack, or anything that you want to challenge yourself on, you have the opportunity of around 6 coaching sessions to really explore and unpack that. And I think that's super valuable, particularly when you're learning new content and you want to stretch yourself a little bit. It gives you that safe space to ask those questions, to try something and experiment, and have that guidance at the same time. So yeah, I'll hand back over to Alexia. If anyone has any questions, feel free to either unmute or pop that in the chat panel. But definitely worth a look at, because it's just going to layer on those skills that you're already building from Basecamp and the exposure that you've already had from PI as well.